Hey, and welcome to today's podcast episode. Today, we're going to talk about identification with form and labels. So, have you ever wondered why certain labels stick to you? Why you call yourself not good at math or too shy for leadership? Today, we're going to talk about identification with form. So, when we use labels to identify what we are and are not. And it came actually to me yesterday when on my day off I went for a walk in the forest and something profound hit me. I was surrounded by trees, just being, without thought, without judgment. And I realized so much of our suffering comes from the stories that we tell ourselves about who we should be, what we are, and what we aren't. That is what inspired me to record this podcast today for you. So, why do we identify with form? And part of this is mental conditioning. So, it's the process of our learned beliefs, our internalized beliefs that we were raised with, that we grew up with. Internalizing of beliefs, values, and behaviors based on repeated experiences and messages and influence that we had when we were younger. So, from a young age, we receive cues about who we are and what we are capable of. And we receive these cues from parents, from teachers, from media, from culture, from our neighbors, from the football coach. They taught us about certain values and beliefs that we took them as our own. And because we are so young, we are even more eager to take on these beliefs. So common childhood labels and their lasting impacts. For example, you're the quiet one, or you're not creative, or you're too sensitive. These labels, they can influence how you grow up and what you think of yourself once you're an adult. And common adult labels that I hear is, for example, I'm a failure, or I am successful, I am powerful. Um, so it's not only the labels that are criticizing, but even the empowering ones like successful or being powerful. Even these, they come back in your adult life. And at some point, they can actually, even though they sound like I am powerful or I am successful, sounds very empowering. Um, but sooner or later, there might come a moment that you're actually not so successful. And that is going to cause a lot of resistance. It's going to cause a lot of frustration for you if you think you are successful and you're not measuring up to that. So sooner or later, even the labels, the form of identification that sound very empowering, will hit at some point a wall and do the opposite. They will not be empowering at all. You will suffer from those because it's not that you will always be successful. There will be times that success is waiting longer for you to happen. Those are the moments that's causing suffering. So when I was in the forest yesterday and I felt this deep, deep inner peace, and it was the absence of all the shoulds and all the musts that we impose on ourselves. And every day we are bombarded with ideas of what success and intelligence and worth looks like. We are bombarded with ideas from outside us, from society, from the TV, reading the news, listening to music, but also our own mind-made rules. Also, we ourselves have these labels about what ideas of what the success looks like and intelligence looks like. So we overwhelm ourselves as well with these thoughts, these mind-made rules, because that's what they are. They are mind-made rules because the rules that I have might not be the same for you. It's not like a universal truth of what success looks like or what intelligence looks like. That can be different for everyone. So these are the mind-made rules where we live by. So the role of labels in our sense of self, that's what I want to talk about, because of course it has a purpose. That's why we're doing it. That's why we identify with form. And we all have this deep, deep need psychologically for identity and for belonging. So identification with form offers a shortcut to understanding ourselves and where we fit in the world. And it's creating a feeling of safety and being part of something bigger than ourselves. So labels, they give us a sense of certainty. And our brains, they seek patterns and categories to simplify like complex information, and it can find that by following something that it has always done in a certain way that feels familiar. So it makes it also easier to simplify information and understand information. So from a young age, we absorb these labels because they come from authority figures. It's often our parents or our caregivers or our teacher, and they repeat or reinforce these labels. For example, if you're in class and the teacher asks you to be a good girl or clean up after yourself and clean the table, then you do that. You might get a reward. Maybe the teacher will tell you, "Well done, you're great, you're my best student." Or maybe you get a sticker at the end of the day because you did so well. These are ways of that it's reinforced to be, in this example, be good. So when you were younger, you got to hear you're the shy one. And if you hear that repeatedly, you may start avoiding social situations. And it's reinforcing that idea that you are indeed a shy person. So over time, the behavior aligns with the label, with the form of identification, and it becomes a core part of your identity. So there's a lot of emotional attachment to these forms of identification because these labels, they provide some sense of security. Even the negative ones, they feel familiar, and that makes them so hard to challenge because they become a part of our comfort zone and of who we are. So the ego, that's our mind made sense of self. It thrives on identity, needs identity to exist. So it doesn't care if the identity is empowering or limiting as long as it provides a sense of self. So the ego will cling on to any form of identity that you take on or that you identify yourself with. So this is why we say things like, I'm just not a numbers person, for example. That's one that I would always say before, that I'm just not good with math, I'm not good with numbers, I'm horrible with anything like that. But also, for example, also I'm too sensitive, or if you say I'm not a leader, or if I've always been bad at relationships, these statements, they reinforce those fixed identity, even if they are self-imposed. So even if you get them at a later time as well in your life, but the relationships, if you had a few relationships that it didn't end well, and you believe I've always been bad at relationships, you strengthen that belief, and it's sort of bound to happen that the next relationship is not going to end well either. So that is the power of that repetition that we see. And the more we hear or say something about ourselves, the more deeply ingrained it becomes. Sort of like our body saves it in every cell of our body, becomes part of who we are. So society often reinforces labels through social roles and expectations. For example, women being conditioned to be nurturers, while men are expected to be leaders. It's still true that leadership in most countries is still male dominated. So there's a confirmation bias because we consciously seek out experiences that confirm the labels, the forms of identification that we believe about ourselves. So, for example, if you believe that you are bad at public speaking, you will notice once you do public speaking, if you would already be willing to try that, maybe you even avoid the whole situation altogether. But if you would try it, you will notice every stumble, every silence that you have, reinforcing that belief that you are bad at public speaking. So even if you have moments of success, it will get unnoticed for you because you believe you're bad at public speaking. So that is also a bit how we get into that self-fulfilling prophecy, of course. When we believe something about ourselves, we act in ways that make it true. So if a child was told that they are not smart, they might stop trying, doing their best in school. So it leads, of course, to poor grades, and it reinforces the belief that they are not intelligent. And the same for adults. I mean, if an adult believes they are unlovable, they may unconsciously, I'm not saying we're always aware of this, unconsciously they may sabotage relationships and it confirms the belief, you see, I am unlovable. So it's a good to maybe think about this, like really let this sink in, and what does it mean for you? And perhaps one of the things that I want to ask you to think about is like, can you think of a label that you've carried for years, and where do you think it came from? So when did that exist? Or was it always there? Was it from childhood there, or did it come in later? So can you think of one label that you've carried for years? And one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you is the power of these forms of identification and how they limit us. Because becoming aware of it is step one. And I think it's really important to understand how they are affecting us in our later life, in your life right now. Like labels, the forms of that we identify with, they influence our decisions in career, in relationships, our self-worth, the chances that we take or don't take. And an example who broke free from these labels, I think we all know Oprah. And Oprah, she was told actually that she wasn't fit for TV. Well, imagine that she would have believed that and taken that on as her form of identity. Like, okay, I am not a person who is fit for TV. I cannot be on TV. I'm not that kind of person for TV. And she would have lived like that. Then would she have the career that she has right now with I don't know how many shows on TV and followers? She wouldn't, right? So she broke free from that form of identification. Someone gave her that label, you are not fit for TV, and she didn't let that stop her. She listened to it at that point, and then she broke free from it. She put it aside and moved towards her dream anyway, and she succeeded. So when we believe something about ourselves, often we act accordingly. If she would have believed it, that she's not fit for TV, and she would have like not taken any chance anymore and not reached out to any other directors anymore, then it would have never happened. But she didn't do that. It's possible to break free from these forms of identification that are limiting to us. So what I noticed yesterday as I stood there, I stood among the trees and I thought, what if like we too, if we just exist without attaching meaning to every aspect of who we think we are? Imagine the freedom of not constantly trying to measure up to any external standard. If that is being successful, being powerful, being a person who gets things done, being shy, being whatever it is, if we let go of that, then what is just left? We still are there, right? We don't disappear or something like that. And I want to ask you, like, what does success even mean to you? Have you truly questioned it? Because society tells us it's about money and possessions and achievement. But is that true for you? What does success mean to you? What does it look like, feel like? So, one of the things that I would like to ask you is before I asked you if which label you've been carrying for years. And now I want to ask you, like, if you could rewrite one label, one form of identification from your past, then what would it be? What would it be? Because there are so many ways that we can identify with. And one very common one, actually, to identify with is victim identity. Maybe you've heard of this before. And it often is when we feel something has happened to us in the past, or some event has happened to us, or people have treated us in a certain way, and we feel victimized by that. We feel like there were negative influence. It's very common to turn towards victim identity. And that is because it is an identity that often comes with a lot of empathy from the people around you. And that empathy reinforces the victim identity. So you kind of get into this spiral where you feel like the victim and you get empathy for that. And the empathy of others reinforces that identity. So how do you break free from victim identity? Let's say that to start up with, like often people think that if we stop identifying with victim identity, that doesn't mean that we ignore what has happened to us in the past. It doesn't mean that we forgive other people for what they've done to us. None of that. It only means that we are no longer identifying with specifically that form of identification. And what it does is that it will open up so many more possibilities once you do. Because, like we said before, when we identify with form, either sooner or later, and often sooner, it is creating a pattern and it's keeping us stuck. It's keeping us in one place. And we will run into the same things in our life and the same problems, the same relationship issues, the same career choices, because we're kind of stuck in that same spiral, in that same form of identity. So once we become free from that form of identity, the world opens up, possibilities open up. So that is one of the identities that I think is very common. Breaking free and rewiring your mindset, it's fairly simple. What you can start with is actually the most important thing that you can do is awareness, creating awareness when you identify with a form, with a label, with a belief. You will notice once you bring in the awareness, it already actually loses its power, the form of identity. If I think of myself in victim identity, the moment I realize that I bring awareness into that, like I feel victimized, that's why I'm playing small or shrinking my presence or doing this or that. At that moment, it loosens the grip that it has because the awareness brings that in. So that's the most important thing. Bring in, catch the limiting beliefs, catch the identification with form once it happens, and bringing in the awareness. That is basically all you need. Of course, you can do reframing after that, but I think the most important thing is bringing in the awareness. Some other things that you can try is like surround yourself with different influences, surround yourself with people who are very different from do very different things, have very different ideas. So they kind of also pull you a little bit out of that comfort zone once you let that happen. You do need to be open, of course, to let that happen. But I think when you listen to this podcast, then you definitely have that sort of willingness. And try consciously, try new things outside of the identity that you've always, the form of identity that you've always used. So, for example, if you are someone who doesn't take risks and you often play it safe, then see if you can do something that feels a little risky to you. Like, I don't know, maybe a new hobby or traveling somewhere by yourself or, I don't know, whatever feels risky for you. But like, try something, don't go too big right away because that might be a very scary step to take. And you might want to protect yourself for that. So take a small step that feels a little bit challenging, but not too challenging. And try something like that. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you is about the forest walk that I did yesterday. And when I looked at the trees, I saw this lesson because life still moves, life still breathes and it thrives without needing a form of identification. Like a tree doesn't label itself as like I am a tree and I am still a tree and I am from wood. It is just a tree. So nature doesn't need a label. Life still continues. It breathes and it moves and it thrives without needing that label. So can we allow ourselves that same freedom? And we often think that we are our past and we are our failures and our successes. But when we let go of these stories, we don't disappear. We step into our full potential. So I really want to encourage you to think about that and ask yourself, what is one small action I can take today to challenge an old belief about myself and see what comes up for you? Because yeah, it can really bring up a lot, and you can sometimes already listening to these words can already give you some sort of shift. So yeah, I will invite you to think about that. What's one small action that you can take today to challenge an old belief about yourself? So, as we wrap up today's episode, I invite you to take a deep breath and really sit with this thought. So, beyond the labels and beyond the stories that we tell ourselves, beyond the successes and the failures, you are still here, simply as you are. And in that space, there is freedom. And if today's episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. And what labels have you been holding on to? And what would it feel like to just be? So, to recap, we really want to start with the awareness, really bringing in the awareness into our thoughts, into our life. And once we catch one of those thoughts, limiting thoughts, these labels, when we identify with form, we can bring in the awareness, and that already will dissolve most of the grip that this has, these limiting beliefs. And then, of course, you can think about reframing, so changing them into more powerful ones. And then another action that you can take, like doing something that feels a little outside of your comfort zone, perhaps. We are not our labels. When you stop identifying with form, you simply just are as I am present. And that is beingness, isness. So I really want you to try and tap into being there, simply in that being present. Even if it's just for a split second, you can feel a shift then. So yeah, I really hope you can experience that. So thank you. We have to wrap up for today. I've been talking for half an hour, but thank you for sharing this time with me. Thank you for sticking with me. If you found value in this conversation, I did love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear it as well. So share it with a girlfriend or your neighbor or your mom or anyone who you think could benefit from this. If you haven't already, hit subscribe so we can continue the journey together. And share a takeaway on social media. I'm on Instagram at the 180 degrees turnaround. 180 is written in numbers, so 180 degrees turnaround. And leave a comment or DM me about a label that you are breaking free from. I'm really curious and excited to hear about what you're working on. So next episode, next time we're going to talk about how to handle the gap between what is and what should be, and ways to move forward when you feel so much resistance when things don't go as you wanted. Until next time, be present, because now is your time.